All right, let's head over to the Zoom line. Warren Martin on the line with us. Kansas strong. How you doing today, sir?
Doing great. How about yourself, Jason?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm pretty excited for today's program because we're going to do some Landman theories, Landman season part two theories, but also we're going to talk about a topic that is going to be very important, actually, and something that everybody in the industry should probably at least have a mental exercise about because we're entering a time where there may be a division happening within the oil and gas industry based on ideology. And folks, I'm just going to let you know right now, I did predict negative oil. So if you think I'm crazy and you think I'm speaking out of school, I heard the same thing when I predicted negative oil and then it happened. And right now I'm seeing a lot of signs that there's going to be some butting of heads, I think, with ideologies. And we'll talk to Warren about that a little bit later because he might have a totally different perspective than I do. I might be seeing something that's not there. But hey, Warren, did you get a chance to digest Landman, the series at this point?
Yeah, I think, excuse me. Sorry, I'm getting over a little bit of a cold here, so apologize for my voice. But yeah, great series. I hope we come back with season two. I think we had enough response. It seemed like everywhere I went, people were talking about seeing it and asking me if I had seen it, and so I'm hoping for a season two and looking forward to what they might come out with.
Be interesting to see how the streaming models work because my understanding it is the most streamed series on Paramount, the streaming network Paramount Plus. And if you can't renew something that's the most streamed on your streaming service, that the only place you can watch it is on your streaming service, Warren, that's what's known as a faulty business plan, and that oil company ain't gonna hunt.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
Well, here's my theory for the storyline for Landman 2. And the reason I wanted to bring it up to you is because you specifically were pointing out the little Easter eggs that they were laying down throughout the entire season of comparing the cartel with the oil and gas industry. And that was one of your and my big concerns for the bigger picture is that the story being told is that the oil and gas industry is the cartel, and the cartel is the oil and gas industry. And my bigger concern for next season is that I think the cartel is going to be the $180 million investor in the land in the oil deal. So they're going to be tied to the hip with the oil and gas company for the entire season too. Warren, have you thought about that and what's your reaction?
I have not thought about that. I think that they're going to be a significant part of the next season. I kind of went a different direction on that. Um, and I went a different direction on that from the standpoint of, again, funding issue. But, Tommy and Billy Bob Thornton's character has created this deal. Demi Moore's checked off on it, and they're going to go forward. They're putting all their chips to the center of the table. That puts them in a precarious position where up till now they've been a well-funded organization, but I think as they move forward, that funding is going to be a little bit dicey coming through. I didn't think about the cartel. I saw that in a different view. What I did think about was what is it that you need to get the investors to the floor? And what you need to get the investors to the floor is you need a deal that is sweetened, that gives you a lot more opportunity for greater exploration, that gives you a greater opportunity for a greater hit. And so I really saw the sweetness of that deal coming down to a war between Tommy and his son Cooper, and the deal that Cooper's putting together, that Tommy's going to have to use his company's influence to prohibit Cooper from being able to find funding to get his program put in place unless he puts it underneath Tommy, unless he brings it into the overall deal. And so I really saw it as a takeover of the son being taken over by the father, and the cartel still being part of the shenanigans on the outside, thus proving what Taylor Sheridan was saying that entire first season, that the cartel is the oil industry and the oil industry is the cartel. And what do cartels do? They find something that's a good deal and they take it over before someone else can make bank on it. So that's where I saw it going. So it's very interesting. We saw two different views on that.
That is, and I want to know your opinion on if the cartel became the $180 million investor, they would become the senior partner and they would be able to call a lot of shots and have a lot of influence. Although MTEX is still the oil and gas company. How does that work, Warren, when you've got somebody that's basically the senior partner that is writing the check for the whole thing, and now you've got, you know, you've got a company that has to listen to the senior partner, so to speak, or the
Yeah,
investor.
I think that's where you fire your landman because the landman failed to do his job. Because the landman's primary job is to make sure that the operating company is the one who is senior charge of the entire event, everything that's going on. That they are the majority owner of what's going on, or at least they have the largest percentage of ownership of the operation that's going forward. And to lose that is really to lose everything. You basically have just handed someone a blank check to do anything they want to do with your company if you don't own that. And so I don't know how that works if they become that significant of an investor. And in practical terms, that wouldn't really work because you'd have to have shell companies and everything else to legitimize that money so it would pass through and be able to have the funding that would also be coming with the bank accounts and everything else that you already have set up for your old company. I don't think you can make that fly in the real world, but hey, we're talking about not the real world. We're talking about Hollywood here, and you make anything fly in Hollywood.
Well, and that's where I'm wondering what direction they're going to go with this because they do have an opportunity to tell a real life story. And there's so much real life drama in the oil and gas industry that they do not necessarily have to sensationalize it too much.
Right.
I mean, like Christian Wallace said that, that necessarily when the worker got killed on the pipes, that wasn't really what happened, except for a person got crushed by pipes and called their wife as the last thing. All the other things that you and I said would never happen, that really didn't happen. The
Right.
only thing that really happened was a guy died and he called his wife, right? And so
Right.
they do that a little bit. But what I'm seeing is that number one, they can go down the real route and show that, the old school hard work is going to pay off and, Billy Bob's company is going to go bankrupt and he's going to end up having to go work for his son. To me, I see that kind of being one direction that it's going to go. And then pretty soon it's a son and father company, not a father and son company, but a son and father company, if you will. And then the other direction is that whether the cartel's a 10% investor or a 90% investor, they're going to look at it just the same and want to be side by side with Tommy Norris entire season 2 being his partner in the whole thing. And then maybe they use the planes, maybe they want to, do some drug running. Anyway, they start embedding and intertwining the two industries together. I could see it going either way. The one is an extremely sensational, probably better Hollywood. The other one is more realistic and better family values. I'm not sure which way it's going to go because this is a wild card, and who knows if it's even going to be back next year. But your thoughts, Warren?
No, I think you're exactly right. I mean, that's the great thing about Hollywood is, the twist. You never know which way it's going to go on that. But I agree with you wholeheartedly that there's enough sensationalization that happens in the oil and gas industry in making these deals. I mean, here in Kansas, you rarely see a well that's put in and drilled by just one company. You see wells that are drilled with multiple companies investing in that well, sharing interest, having conflicts, having issues, going to court. There's a lot of drama that happens. But again, it's not the sensational drama of guns being held to the head and bags put over the head, that kind of drama. It's real life drama that really impacts the potatoes on the table and what people are able to do as far as their job and their livelihood going forward. And I hope that they move more in that direction. because as we've talked about on this show many times, the one great thing about this show is it has people talking about the oil and gas industry. And I think that is a net positive. I think more people need to be talking about the oil and gas industry because it is going to be a significant issue moving forward over the next 30 years.
And I'm just going to do one quick PSA before we go to the next topic of the potential butting
Wait,
of the
before you do the
heads.
PSA, we got
Yeah,
to hit one more thing.
yeah.
One more prediction
Oh,
is I'm absolutely certain that what Angela and her daughter are doing at the nursing home is absolutely going to blow up next season in their face in some way. That's my great prediction for the next season.
can I tell you one of the most uncomfortable scenes of the entire series was when they were unloading the senior citizens from the van after the strip club. I seriously thought one of them was going to die. I thought one of them was going to have a heart attack and they were going to find him dead on the bus. I thought that was going to happen, but it didn't. Instead, we had the EMT driver just say this was the most despicable thing I've ever seen in my life. or whoever it was that said it. I just thought that was funny. But no, a PSA for the uh, drama versus violence when it comes to how to tell a story of drama. Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, spoke before Congress to get funding back in the day, and he explained that his program focused on the emotional conflict that children have because there's more than enough drama with children trying to figure out how to manage their emotional conflicts than there is with guns or any sort of violence. And that's what this kind of reminds me of a little bit here is that the oil and gas industry has so much emotional stories to be told without the violence that's manufactured that I do hope they go that direction, the Mr. Rogers direction. Imagine that, the oil and gas industry going the Mr. Rogers direction instead of the cartel direction, if you will. But that always stood out in my mind, that Mr. Rogers speech before Congress. If anybody hasn't seen it, just YouTube it. It's about 7-10 minutes long. It's very good. The senator and congressman were blown away by the whole thing because they had never heard of his program before. They had never heard of his program. So, at any rate, Warren, did you know that about Mr. Rogers, that he had spoke before Congress and stuff?
I'm a huge Mr. Rogers fan, and it would tickle my heart pink if all the cartel members showed up next season in sweaters
That'd be
and
great. And hand puppets and
changed
the
out
whole
their
deal.
guns for sweaters and wanted to be neighbors. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think you're exactly right. I mean, especially Mr. Rogers, he was talking to our, and a lot of people don't understand our youth. When we watch movies, when we watch different things as adults, we become very abstract thinkers, and so we can kind of compartmentalize. Still think it impacts us, but we still have the ability to compartmentalize, see it as fantasy. But young children are concrete thinkers. They don't have that abstract view of things. What they see is what it is. And I think we would do well to remember that.
So as we next chapter here, we talk about some of the issues that are kind of percolating in the oil and gas industry, and in fact, there's quite a few past interviews over the last couple of years right here on the Crude Life, and you can go find them elsewhere. But Warren, I wanted to get your opinion on the carbon sequestration and the carbon capture industry because it involves the whole idea of climate change. And in order to go ahead with carbon capture and carbon sequestration, you have to accept the idea of climate change. And the oil and gas industry, they must have spent $40 billion over the last 20 years fighting the narrative of carbon capture, I'm sorry, of climate change and a lot of these different things. And now that there's such a large public investment that is going into carbon capture, there is a little bit of a mad dash to get those dollars. And when the mad dash is happening, it's almost like there's some companies and some some sectors that are being pushed in the cracks, not being left behind or fall in the cracks. They're being pushed in the cracks. And I thought of you right away with all the independents out in Kansas, because we've talked about how Kansas can be the canary in the coal mine so many times when it comes to the oil and gas economy, because small business gets hit first so many different times when it comes to supply chain and logistics and all these different areas. So I'm looking at a butting of the heads coming via the carbon management ideologies and the public fundings and some of the tax credits and et cetera. Um, where are you seeing some friction and some coming to the heads coming with the oil and gas industry? And this is the Covenant couch here. This is a safe space today.
Well, I don't know that a public broadcast of issues in the oil and gas industry is ever a safe place. But with that being said, I think that I don't know that the butting of the heads is really coming on different companies' stance on climate change. I think a lot of companies' stance on climate change really has to do with the monies that are available for certain projects for certain things that are taking place, carbon capture being one of them. And that companies, especially companies that have margin, that have the ability to diversify, are utilizing and have utilized programs and bought into programs where they could get some of those publicly funded program dollars into their coffers as a way of moving their company forward in a more diversified way, as well as position themselves as more of a energy company rather than an oil and gas company. As you've seen over the past decade, numerous companies across the entire United States have renamed themselves from being oil and gas companies to energy companies. And a lot of that has been playing to the choir, trying to relieve some of the pressure from the climate change issue off of their backs. And I think that has pushed other companies that have refused to have any part of that into cracks and into those positions. The division that I'm seeing right now goes right into what you're talking about. And I think that division is coming over money. It's coming over where is our funding going to come from. A lot of the carbon capture that has been taking place has been funded not just for oil companies going out and participating in carbon capturing, but has gone through universities, has gone through public entities that have been funded by the federal government to enable them to begin this process of carbon capture with pipelines and fields and seismic shoots and all of that stuff being funded by the federal government. With Trump coming into office, that really puts into question where it is the future for carbon capture going forward. I think the same thing is happening when it comes to where we are in the oil and gas industry right now, where I can't tell you how many times I've been out speaking in the past few weeks where people are like, "Hey, you got it going on right now. Trump's in office, so everything should be great with y'all." Yet we're seeing some division that's taking place in the oil and gas industry. For instance, Trump announced his tariffs on Canada and Mexico. And when he announced those tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China, you had a real divide that took place in the oil and gas industry. You had the National Stripper Well Association, which represents stripper wells that produce 15 barrels a day per well or less. And they came out very much in favor of those tariffs, supporting the tariffs and supporting Donald Trump's view on those tariffs. Why? Because it would raise the price of crude oil. And over the past 4 years, since the pandemic, what we've seen is the price of oil hasn't really been a problem. It's stayed right around that $70 a barrel, which is a manageable amount of oil of dollars for a barrel of oil for us to be able to continue on. But what's undermined us is the increased regulatory action that's taken place, the increased cost for steel and for pipe that has raised the cost of production, has raised the cost of exploration and drilling, which has shrunk the margins to where if you're living in that marginal well society, $70 isn't what it used to be because it costs so much to get that oil out of the ground now as compared to what it did 5 years ago. And so the National Stripper Well Association came out and put out a press release that said we're fully supportive of Donald Trump's tariffs. At the same time, API, which generally, the American Petroleum Institute, which generally represents more of our larger producers here in the United States and the refineries and pipeline companies, they came out with a much more muted response saying that they would continue to work with the Trump administration for free and fair markets in oil and gas. They weren't favorable towards those tariffs going forward. Why? They have greater margins, they have more flexibility, and a significant amount of their companies do business in Canada, Mexico, and China all at the same time. And so it's going to impact them different. And there's really a divide that's taken place in those areas right there. I think the real critical issue that the oil industry is really looking for is when it comes to the regulatory side. There's two sides of that coin. One side of the coin is the price of oil. The other side of the coin is the cost of production. How much does it cost to produce that oil? On the cost of production side of it, I think the real key there is deregulation. And Trump has promised deregulation coming in, and we really haven't heard a whole lot about his efforts on deregulation. That's the one thing that he can absolutely control, is mandating what his agencies that are working under him do and do not do when it comes to regulatory practices towards the oil and gas industry. And I think he could take a lot of pressure off of the industry if he really made a push for that deregulation. And I think when you saw Chris Wright being affirmed as our energy secretary, approved as our energy secretary, API again came out with an immediate press release, and that press release was how that they were looking forward to working with Chris Wright, and they immediately went after liquid natural gas exports and the deregulation of liquid natural gas exports, and to be able to get the permitting process to be able to export those that product going forward. And so there was a very immediately a push for, hey, we need that deregulation and we need that now. Because as you know, it takes time to put together an oil and gas plan. It takes time to put together a production plan or a discovery plan to go out and do exploration. And the longer we go into Trump's administration before we see that deregulation really take effect, the harder it is for a company to have enough time to put together a project and finish that project before there's the threat that the deregulation is going to change under a new administration. And so I think that is the key side of the coin that we're not hearing a lot of. And I think it is really kind of pushing more on that divide between how the oil and gas companies view the tariffs.
Do you think that the carbon management industry was a way to control the oil and gas industry?
I think that the carbon management industry is a way to utilize um, funds that come from the oil and gas industry as a way to address climate change without having to use as much of our government funding to address that issue. It was a way to pigeonhole some of those companies into that. In other words, you help us out with this, and we'll back off on you on these areas over here. And so I think that the whole carbon tax credits, all of that is a way to, basically try and push oil and gas companies into participating in climate-related efforts, whether they agree with them or not.
I see it a little bit different. I see it as that the oil and gas industry really truly represented freedom.
Mhm.
And you drive in your car and you can just get on the open road and you can go and you can have natural gas heat, which gives you some energy security and freedom. And so when I take a look at what the oil and gas industry was when I was growing up and what it is today, and I look at the shift, the government is, from COVID to today, the government has printed more money than the United States had printed the previous 250 years. So you could make the argument that over the last several years, they created another economy, another country, another economy. and it's carbon based because it's part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And so a lot of the money goes to a nonprofit or a university, and that's who's directing the ship. And then they work with corporations. So, number one, I see small businesses who used to be the drivers of innovation, they just got cut out. The research universities are kind of taking that over, and the government is funding it to make sure of it. And the small business people are getting pushed in the cracks or left behind because the universities primarily work with corporations and larger companies. At least in my neck of the woods, they do. And so that to me seems very problematic because as we go into the carbon management industry, you might have to check in with somebody before you can drive your car. And as silly as that sounds, there's other countries where that's already happening. San Francisco is already test marketing these things. We've got smart cities that they're implementing. So we're not that far away. And Warren, I truly believe that in order to create this new world with less freedom on the individual, they had to change the oil and gas industry and how humans produced it and consumed it, I guess. Are you following me at all, Warren, at all?
No, I'm following you. I think you're exactly right, and I don't think we disagree at all. I think everything that you're saying right there, the next step of that is you have to get oil and gas companies to play ball. And how do you get oil and gas companies to play ball?
Okay,
You
so
get them to you get them to play ball by putting pressure on them and say, hey, if you don't push in this direction and step out and participate in carbon capture, then we're going to make it a whole lot harder on you on the regulatory side and what you're able to do going forward. And you got to get the oil and gas company. And that's why I disagreed at the beginning, saying I don't know that it's that many companies that actually agree with the climate change narrative. It's just that they saw that as the easiest way forward to continue doing the business they do.
so this is the part that that to me is controversial, okay? Because when I take a look at, now keep in mind back in 2012, 2013, 2014, I was being published in a lot of magazines, and I would do like profiles of different people from different parts of the country, one from the Permian, one from the Marcellus, maybe one from the Niobrara, get Oklahoma, Kansas in there, and if you get Alaska or California, you score double points, right? That type of thing. So, but I called it like women in energy, CEOs in energy, and I had people get mad at me. They would say we're oil and gas, we're not energy. Well, I came from the media industry. I came from the publishing industry that got wiped out by the paradigm shift of the internet. And the way that newspapers had to survive was they had to reinvent themselves. Because when a paradigm shift happens, everybody goes through an identity crisis. Nobody knows who they are anymore. And so the reason that I was saying energy companies was because I saw that oil and gas companies had to become energy companies, had to get into biomass, had to get into microwave, had to get into nuclear. And if you got into wind and solar, well, you're going to kind of fight with yourself internally, and that's your own issue. But my point is that I saw energy as a way to diversify their industry. I'm not sure the industry changed based on that. I felt like they changed more as a reaction to get money. They changed more as they got their arm twisted and they got, strong armed into it, as opposed to doing it consciously like, hey, we should really look at this. We are energy. We're not. And in fact, I think Oxy even calls himself carbon management. And so they're not even energy. They're the carbon industry, which is everything. But what do you make of that, where it almost seemed like the switch from oil and gas to energy was more reactionary than it was natural, I guess?
Oh, I think so. I think when you look at the major players, the major producers who are out there, they were the first ones to kind of jump on board with that. They started diversifying their portfolio. I don't know that it was diversifying. I don't know that it was diversifying it as far as like most of the time when we talk about diversification, we're talking about protecting our income. I don't think it was that at all. It was diversifying to keep the federal government off their back more than it was anything else, to get a better report card from the federal government more than it was to do with their economic standing going forward. Then I think you had a bunch of smaller independent companies that really didn't diversify at all. They didn't get into any of those alternative programs, but they saw what larger companies were doing. They wanted to project an image that they were larger than they were. They began to change and began to utilize that energy term. And I also think you have a whole nother segment of oil and gas companies that are out there that simply took on the name energy to deflect public criticism, especially in states like Colorado, New Mexico, where oil and gas was such a controversial term that it made it easier on your employees, it made it easier on your business to call yourself an energy company rather than an oil and gas company. So I think there was a multiple reason why, but I think all of them are reactionary. I don't know that any of them jumped on board as really a way of diversifying to make money, diversifying as a way to build their business. As far as not in the way that you would acquire a new farm because you could add to your production. It's more of you buy the new farm to keep a junkyard from being built next door to you. Is more of that kind of approach than anything else. And I think that that's what you've seen most of all going forward.
What about ingenuity and innovation? I mentioned that before, that I believe that the choices being made to it almost seems like all the eggs are going into the university basket. And I do think there's a place for universities, but I also think there's a place for small business. And I'm not quite sure that the small business is being satisfied. Now, I'm not talking about a startup. No, because anybody can go do a startup, and that's generally how you get very corrupt uh, um, government, is when startups happen and they quick get the money because whatever, they know somebody and it's quick and all these other things. But I do see innovation being a problem, and especially when they've spent the amount of money that's being spent. And do you see that at all being a problem, or do you think we're going to be ahead with innovation at the end of the day? Because universities have a lot of resources. They have a lot of
Well,
resources.
yeah. So I'll jump off of what you just said. As far as you have a startup company and then they get a lot of money, and that's a dangerous place to be. That's where a lot of corruption takes place. And yet, when it comes to innovation here in America, that's exactly what we've seen happen. When you take a look at wind, solar, when you take a look at electric vehicles, the federal government jumping on board saying, this is our future, here it is right now, even though we have proven and shown that there's not enough rare earth materials to be able to even transform the entire small car fleet in the United States to our current model of electric vehicle. There's not enough rare materials to do that just in the United States. There's not enough of an electric grid to be able to power them. And yet we've put all of our eggs into a basket to fully fund wind and solar and these electric vehicles going forward that has come from the federal government. And what has that done? It's stifled innovation. And so, yes, innovation is very key, and it's critical for us to figure out how between now and 2050, when in 2050 we're going to have to produce 28% more energy than we currently produce on an annual basis, we're going to have innovation to be able to get to that marker. And the only way to drive that innovation is to bring back a free market, get the federal government out of it, and let people actually go out and innovate to see who can come up with the best technology going forward. I mean, the fastest growing energy sector that we have, it's not oil, it's not gas, it's not coal, it's not nuclear, it's not wind, it's not solar. The fastest energy sector we have growing right now is efficiency. Efficiency is adding more energy to the grid than any other additional source that we're bringing online on an annual basis. So innovation is going to be critical for us to be able to meet the energy demands going through the year 2050. And the only way that we stifle that is get the federal government behind it, and let's throw all our eggs in a basket and say, there it is, that's it. And then we stop trying to innovate and we start trying to meet government standards to get the money. And that's where innovation dies.
One of the more interesting stories I've ever done was back in like 2015. There was one of those stripper wells, and I think it was actually Kansas, and they had about six solar panels right next to it, and that's what allowed it. It did like, I don't know, 15 barrels a week or something like that. It was one of those wells that it couldn't pay anybody to be there, but they need to power it, and so they used solar panels to power the rig. And I thought, hey, there's some innovative thinkers there. Good work trying to make something work a little bit. But yeah, I'm starting to see the oil and gas industry, sections of it with universities, become the solar and wind industry, which is we're over promising and we're under delivering. So give us more money.
Mhm.
We're the same people going to the same places, doing the same things, and we're not hitting it. And the solar industry was supposed to be at the terawatt of storage a long time ago. The wind industry has animal extinction problems, as in my opinion, that's actually their number one problem. Um, and I still stand by my statement that the Amish are more advanced in wind energy and efficiency than we are. When you think about the energy input and output, they can put up a windmill in a weekend and they get power and water going forward. That's pretty darn good for a family. You know what I'm saying? So, um, what do you make of that? I think there's going to be a butting of the heads with waste, if you will, government waste and government efficiency within the oil and gas industry. And up in North Dakota, it's starting to show itself in enhanced oil recovery. Now, there's some areas of enhanced oil recovery that are just being doing fantastic. Parts of Wyoming, parts of Texas, they're really finding some very profitable and efficient ways for enhanced oil recovery. And then there's other areas where they've been dumping money into it for 20 years and they're not even 5% there. And now they're going to get more money than they've ever gotten before. So I'm starting to see that percolate too a little bit. You hearing anything on enhanced oil recovery?
Not really, not here. We're pretty simple when it comes to enhanced oil recovery here in Kansas. It's the eastern side of Kansas. Almost all of it is enhanced oil recovery that's taking place there. That's pretty water flood, pretty simple. But I want to go to your point. Excuse me. I want to go to your point as far as funding through universities, funding through nonprofit organizations, NGOs, those types of things that are giving government funding to be able to get behind certain technologies and certain ways of doing things. And I think what is going to be the crippling effect on the industry is the same thing that's a crippling effect on every industry. The moment you remove it from being part of the free market. And free markets allow you to utilize what's going to work best to make you the most money. So, for instance, when you were in Kansas and you saw oil well that's being run by solar panels, I'm not someone who's against solar panels. I'm not someone who's against wind turbines. I'm not against any of that. What I am against is mandating that everybody has to have a solar panel and everybody has to use windmills. There are places where that is your best option. There are places out here where we have remote wells where it's a whole lot cheaper to run it off a solar panel than it is to run a line, electric line, out to that well to run that well for the minimal amount of oil that you're going to get from it. So I really think what kills innovation, what kills the industry, is when we begin mandating that this is it, everybody's got to participate in this way. And we need to really push at this point in time with the president that we now have in office. We really need to be pushing for a free market approach to figure out what is the best way to move forward in this situation and this situation. And those may be completely different ways forward. Going forward. But I think that's critical that we maintain that free market approach to allow people to develop their innovation and develop what works best for them and see what it is that rises to the top, because the cream will always rise to the top. And that's where we really figure out what will work and what won't work. And let me tell you, there will not be an answer that will work in all situations.
One of the issues when some of the government agencies and public-private partnerships and things, they can get pretty competitive. And when you're a small business and you're out in the marketplace and you're trying to make the better steak sandwich and you have the better steak sandwich And then when a government and a nonprofit compete in the free market with government money, it becomes hard because what they essentially do then is they go get the steak sandwich and then they reverse engineer it through their university system. So the nonprofit goes into the restaurant and gets the or invites the business owner in and says, "Oh, we love your steak sandwich. Oh, this is great," and everything along those lines. We're a nonprofit. Can you help us? And all these, I mean, they even pull that card occasionally. And at the end of the day, I laugh because I'm going, they're doing all this basically for major corporations because those are the ones who are benefiting in the end of the day. And so, and I know that a lot of times the universities don't see it that way. The public-private partnerships don't see it that way. But the person on the receiving end of it definitely sees it that way. The steak sandwich maker, because they don't have the resources and to reverse engineer and everything along those lines. But I do think that's happening more than people think, Warren.
Yeah,
And
and I
go
think it's
ahead.
happening. I think it's happening because of what you just said. The scenario you just let's flesh that out a little bit more. The scenario you just set up. The reason the universities don't see that is what is happening is because the university is not in the business of making a steak hamburger. That's not their goal.
Right.
That's not their purpose. Their purpose is reverse engineering it and selling it to someone else. That's their goal. And so their entire goal is to figure out how do we reverse engineer more and more and more and more and more of these products? How do we reverse engineer more and more of this?
Or
And
business models or
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 business
or,
model.
or theories or
Yeah.
concepts. Yes.
Or take windmills. You know, if you find that windmills work in this certain situation, if it's part of a government funding, the entire goal of the government funding is to figure out how do you grow your budget by 5% more or 10% more the next year. Whether it's going to be better or not is irrelevant. The whole goal is to grow that department. And in universities, a lot of that is the same there as well. The whole goal is to grow the department, continue to grow the department. And so that's where I say if we want innovation, we have to bring it back to the free market and realize that, hey, we don't have the best electric vehicle out there. We don't have the best wind recovery system. We don't have the best solar recovery system. We don't have the best combustion engine out there. There is more that we can do to develop all of those to a greater degree. But the only way that's going to happen is if we allow free thinkers to do their thing. Some are going to succeed, some are going to fail, but those that succeed are going to move us forward to a higher level than we've ever seen before. But as soon as we begin to put guidelines and regulations on what they can and cannot do, we stifle innovation.
Well, what should people keep an eye on, Warren? Let's wrap her up here, and we've got some anything in policy that you want anybody to keep an eye on. You guys aren't in session yet, are you, Kansas?
Yeah, we're in session down here. We
Oh,
don't have a whole lot going on in session here in Kansas related to the oil and gas industry. I think the major thing to keep an eye on is Chris Wright right now. I think the oil industry is really looking for him to take the lead. I'm a big fan of Chris Wright. Met him, talked with him. We have if he's one of the few people I've ever heard speak that shares a message that almost the exact same way that I share a message. It's all about humanity focus and what is for the betterment of humanity on this earth. I'm really excited about that and him being our energy secretary. I think one of the key things that we need to see there is, like I said, you got those two sides of the coin. On the one side of the coin is oil and gas production and the price per barrel of that oil. On the other side of it is the deregulation, especially when it comes to methane deregulation, and how much pressure is going to be put on the EPA and other agencies to really roll back a lot of that regulation. Right now, you have a lot of energy companies that are just banking money. Our rig production is down to some of the lowest levels it's been since the pandemic. And most larger companies are banking money rather than putting it into exploration. And they're doing so, I think, because there's an uncertain future about where are we exactly going to go this year when it comes to oil and gas. You also see that in investments. Most investors are taking short-term contracts rather than long-term contracts because there's so much uncertainty that's there. So I think it's really going to be incumbent that we need to be watching Chris Wright and what he's going to do on both sides of that coin to really give a wider range of margin for all oil and gas producers, where they can go out and do some of these innovative things and do some more exploration and increase our barrels without losing their margins.
fact, that should be our next interview, a review of the cabinet from an energy mindset. If they're going to be a friend or kind of a foe, if you will, of the energy industry. So, but Warren Martin, Kansas Strong, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
You bet. We'll be talking to you again here down the line.